This is the Leica M3. It's not only my favorite film camera, my favorite Leica, my favorite M, it's literally my favorite camera of all time. Now, it doesn't always get the publicity or the fanfare or people talking about it. It's like some of the other cameras, the M6 or the modern MP, for example. And there is a few limitations that for some people it might make it not the right camera. But for me personally, it is the greatest camera of all time. Now, you got to remember with cameras like this, especially film cameras, for me, the latest features, the light meter, the frame lines, things like that, it's not always what it's about for me. This camera is about stripping back down to just the essentials, which to me is what the M is all about. So let's jump into this camera. Let's talk about some of the features, why I love it so much, and yeah, let's check out these beautiful cameras. I don't want to get too much into the history of the M3, but I want to touch on it a little bit. I think it's one of the most historical M's ever made, considering it was the first. And the big thing, this came after first Leica had standard cameras, they were called, I believe. They had like a fixed lens on them, and then eventually they went to a screw mount with removable lenses. But the big downside of the screw mount cameras is you have two viewfinders. One that you focus through first, then you move the camera up, I believe, and you compose in the second window. Now, beyond having two windows, which adds an extra step, they are incredibly hard to see through. I mean, I have decent vision, and honestly, it's like zone focus only for me. It's incredible the photographers that use those and the images they got out of it. But the M combines both of those viewfinders not only into one, but also makes it much easier to see through. For me, that's why I stick to the M's. Like I said, I'm not really a big screw mount person. I totally appreciate them. But for me, it starts at 1954 with the M3. The other thing, a lot of people love the screw mount lenses, myself included. I have this 73 Hector here, I believe from 1936. I have a screw mount collapsible Summicron, also one of my favorite lenses, like the one that's on this M3 here. And all you have to do is put on a simple screw mount adapter. So it basically threads right under the screws and it converts it to M bayonet mount. So even if you want to use your screw mount lenses, I mean, other than just the nostalgia of using a screw mount body, I just think adapt them and use them on an M just like this with perfect functionality. All right, so here's the thing. This channel is about what I love. I'm not doing this for any other reason other than just to share my passion and kind of the things I love. Just remember the M3 may not be the perfect camera for you, just explaining why it's special to me. But I'll break it down into a few different reasons. Number one is a sentimental attachment to the M3. It was my first Leica that I ever bought. And man, I bugged the local camera store people. I was looking through the showcases, and at a time when a camera like this was a huge purchase for me. And thinking back to then, man, it was incredible the first time I held one, and I was used to, mirrorless cameras and professional tools, Canon, Sony's I think I was using at the time, which are great. But the first time you feel this solid brick of brass, it's like, man, you never forget that. And I love making things. I appreciate good craftsmanship. So right away, I could feel the quality, the German engineering, and I was hooked. All right, reason number two, and probably the most useful reason why an M3 is best for me, why it might be good for you, or maybe why it won't be good for you. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, 50mm, 90, and 135 are your only available frame lines in camera, and there is a benefit to that. Now, the magnification on this viewfinder is a 0.91, which means that it's going to fill basically the entire viewfinder with the 50mm frame lines when they're pulled up. Now, what benefits does that give you? Well, it allows better and easier critical focusing. You have a larger focus patch, and the rangefinder window on the outside, basically giving you your frame lines, is incredibly bright and just, I don't know, the viewfinder is just so easy to see through. And for me, 50mm is my favorite focal length, like I talk about often. When you're using like an f2 lens like this, your 0.72 finders, even 0.58s that you'll find in other cameras, they're totally fine. But when you use a Noctilux, my personal favorite lens, a 0.95, you kind of want every bit of help you can get focusing that thing. And having that bright range finding patch just makes it a lot easier to get critical focus on those kind of harder to use lenses like the Noctilux lines, especially when you get closer to minimum focus. So that is something to think about with a camera like this, that 0.91 viewfinder for a 50mm. If you love shooting 50, you gotta try an M3. It is an experience unlike any other M. So another funny thing, kind of talking about when I first bought the camera. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I did quite a bit of research, but at the time I was pretty new into Leica, and I kind of bought the M3 because at the time it was the most affordable. I think I paid around $650 for quite a clean body. And funny enough, also kind of in the same vein, my lens that I got with it was a collapsible Summicron. I think I paid 300 bucks for it. Man, little did I know how good that combination was. Unfortunately, I did end up selling that to fund a digital M and a modern 50 Summilux, but it's funny how things kind of come around, and I ended up right back here with a 50 rigid, a collapsible, and kind of my M3s, those almost entry-level kind of prices that you would have found back then. Even now today, the M3 is still a great value. So just kind of funny, I think a lot of us Leica people would love to have those first cameras and lenses that we ever bought and sold stupidly. All right, I want to quickly touch on the build quality and the aesthetics of the M3 and why I love both of those aspects about it so much. So I'm very lucky. I have a Leica master technician that lives like 30 minutes away from me. He did his training at Lights Canada and also worked in the factory. So he's super knowledgeable about these cameras and kind of the ins and outs of them and what makes them kind of different inside throughout the different models. And of course, servicing them, he sees, issues that come up and things that break. But he tells me that although what maybe you and I think about the brass external, which is beautiful, some of the later M6s have like a zinc top plate. Now, feel and aesthetically, we prefer the brass, but what he tells me is, of course, this is just a shell. It's almost like the first layer of protection. What really is important is what's inside the camera. And he tells me that the M3 and the M4 actually are the best built M's of all time, featuring the most metal parts, the most brass, and I believe stainless steel kind of gears and mechanisms inside of it. And the thing is, I've been told that the brass gears, they kind of wear to each other really nice because brass is a softer material. And man, the feel of a properly adjusted but also used M3, because the more you use these cameras, believe it or not, actually kind of the better condition they stay in. So always use your cameras, don't let them sit on a shelf, and have them serviced regularly, of course. But yeah, the M that's been properly used and serviced, in my opinion, I never feel like an Advance quite that smooth and quite that nice. Now, of course, this isn't going to affect your image quality, but when you invest in a nice piece of, engineering like this, and it's something that's not cheap, right? We want it to feel nice, and just something about that action of the M3 just makes you want to take photos. One other thing I quickly wanted to touch on was kind of servicing of this camera like I talked about. Now, any old film camera that you buy, I typically say you should budget for a CLA just in case. You definitely should ask the seller when's the last time it was CLA'd, but with these online sellers and wherever you may find this, eBay, people maybe don't know or think it had been serviced, just budget for it. And honestly, if it's something like this, I think you're better off to just start with a fresh CLA, and then you know what you're getting into from the beginning. Because what can happen is the grease and the lubricants inside the cameras can kind of solidify, and you can cause damage trying to advance it. So you want to be careful. Definitely ask if there's haze or fungus in the viewfinder. So just a few things I wanted to mention. Really buying any old vintage camera, but especially a nicer one like a Leica. Okay, now quickly the aesthetics. Now, if you'll notice, I'll do a close-up here. The windows here of the viewfinder have these raised kind of like patches around them. Now, functionally, I don't think it really does anything. Maybe it helps some stray light to come in for flares and things like that, but I can't see it doing too much. But honestly, it's just aesthetically beautiful. And I would assume quite difficult to stamp or however they have done the manufacturing. So if you'll notice, M2, M4, everything kind of going after the M3 and the original MP will have just flat kind of top plates here. Now, I think it looks beautiful. Some people prefer the flat look. Again, it's just a personal preference, but I think it's absolutely gorgeous. So outside of those two cameras, like the original MP is like going for over $1 million now, and a few you'll see special edition Leicas that they have made recently in the last like 20 years based on a remake MP. They will have kind of a throwback to this, but generally the M3 is going to be your most common camera you'll find this feature on, and if you like it, it's the one to pick up. All right, a few more quick bits about the M3 I just wanted to mention. First of all, the film loading in this camera. Now, it's a little bit different. The M3, the M2, I believe, or the 2 and the original MP, they have this spool system. Now, you'll see a lot of people saying, oh, it's difficult to use, it's, you know, it's harder, it takes longer. In my opinion, it's a little bit of a more secure connection. Like, you know for sure when you put the film in this that it's gonna work and it's not gonna slip out. And honestly, I don't see how it's difficult at all. You do it a few times, you learn it no problem. It's very easy to use, and I kind of prefer it, to be honest. Another thing, just going back to that viewfinder again real quick. Now, yes, you only have 50mm frame lines, but I just wanted to say quickly, if you do want to use a wider lens, you totally can. You're just not going to be able to see through the camera's built-in optical viewfinder. What you'll need to do is get an external finder like I have here. This is for a 35. They also make them for 28, 21. And unfortunately, you're going to kind of go back to that, what I was talking about with the screw mount camera, where you're going to focus through your viewfinder with the camera, and then you're going to compose through the optical finder. Although these are a lot brighter and larger and easier to see through, so even so, it is much easier to use than the screw mount camera. So don't feel like you're completely limited if you buy an M3. I use a 35 on this all the time. I use a 28. Now, it's not the most precise or perfect framing, but it definitely gets the job done with a nice finder like this. The other thing, the price compared to other Leicas, other M's, the M3 is still kind of on the lower end. I think if I looked right now, you know, 1,000 to like 2,500, depending on the version and the model. So yeah, for a body, it's still quite affordable. Again, one of these collapsible Summicrons you can find in like the 500 to 800 range. So really, for like 2,500, less than $3,000, you can get, in my opinion, one of the highest performing, amazing rangefinders ever made. Now, the light meter, that's another thing to talk about. For some people, it's a deal breaker. I totally get it if you want that light meter. For me, I enjoyed it because it brought me back to when I needed to meter, and it really kind of like slowed me down. And now I'm much better at metering than when I was just looking through a mirrorless camera and kind of using the EVF to judge my exposure and using the meter in there, of course. And yeah, walking around with a light meter, I've really gotten good now. And honestly, like, I can take one reading, or sometimes I don't really even need to, and I can pretty much nail the exposure. So that's kind of nice. I think doing that teaches you, when you go to even the most modern, say you're using the Q3 43 or SL, it kind of makes you understand lighting and exposure and how the meter works and things like that. So I kind of feel like it's a great learning tool. You know, learn how to expose manually. It's really nice. But of course, I understand how it could be a deal breaker. So it might not be right for you. And that's really kind of the thing with this camera. If you have to have the viewfinder where you can see 35 or 28, it's not going to be for you. And if you have to have a light meter, the M3 is also not going to be for you. All right, to conclude this video, now, I just wanted to give kind of a quick overview of the M3 and why I personally love it so much. I get people all the time asking me, what's your favorite M? What's your focal length, your lens? So I figured I'd start with the body. Like I said, my favorite film camera of all time, not just Leica or M. And you might notice these finishes are a little different than what you normally see in silver. And I think that I will do a video kind of maybe specifically talking about each finish, or kind of why this one's olive green, why this one's black paint, kind of what makes them unique. But for this video, like I said, I just wanted something kind of simple, just an overview, and why you may or may not want the M3. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the next one.